Hello?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for staying for this very important dialogue. I am honored and humbled to be here with April and Paul and Iris and Dr. Williams. I'm so honored to be able to dialogue first with them a little bit, and then we're going to open it up. We're also taking questions from Twitter, from social media, so we'll have a really open and hopefully kind of community dialogue about this very powerful documentary and what we just saw. So I hope people are filling out things if they want to ask questions. Hopefully we'll get to a good number of them in the time that we have left, and let me know if you need us to speak up or anything like that as we're proceeding with this. So I guess my first question I wanted to ask was specifically about kind of one of the outcomes that is featured here, right? The collaborative agreement to thinking about this, and wondering about it as something as, could we speak to its continued kind of effectiveness, its limits, its applicability, particularly in light of more recent incidences between Black people and law enforcement?
So you want me to answer that?
Sure.
So let me first say thank you to everyone that watched the video and that stayed in the room and want to have this conversation. So thank you so very much. Give yourselves a hand. And I want to say thank you to my sister friend, Deanna Hoskins, for driving me up here, because I'm one bad chick, but if you want to take me out, put me on a bridge. Did that go over your head? So my name is Iris Rowley, and I am a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, unfortunately, but fortunate for them. I was born in a family of activists, so it's in my DNA. So if I speak in a tone or with arrogance or with any vein about fighting for the liberation of African Americans, don't get mad at me. It's who I am, and it was who I was born to be, and it's my gift from the Creator. So when we talk about the collaborative agreement, as with any agreement, there are hills and mountains to climb. We're talking about changing systems and cultures that have been in place for a very long time to control and contain people. And unfortunately, we did something that was very far-sighted in 2001, but not so far-sighted enough that we would recognize that police get additional tools, training, dollars, more tools, more training, and dollars, and communities don't. In particular, those that are impacted negatively by very biased and traditional policing, such as mine, those that look like me. I don't have to tell you who they are. You all should know that by now. I am not a minority. We are the majority in the city of Cincinnati. And so with that, we are first-class citizens. We pay taxes, we work. I am not a criminal, neither is my husband or my 3 sons, or most of my friends. And even if they are to be treated with dignity and respect. So when you talk about agreements that want to attempt to change systems that have been for those to create a permanent underclass, it's a very strong and mighty feat. I do want to correct one thing. We filed in March of 2001. That was almost 2.5 weeks, April and Paul, before Timothy Thomas was murdered by Officer Caton, who was still on the force. And so when I watched as much as I could of the video, it brought back a lot of things, a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, and a whole lot of anger. And I almost feel the same way that I did in 2001 and 2015. When our third mayor, and I say all this to give you a landscape on this canvas of where these things can go. And while we thought we were being preventative of another murder of another unarmed black man, Timothy Thomas was the 15th. What made Roger Owensby and Jeffrey Irons so very significant in the city of Cincinnati was that we call them 2 and 24. And while most of you who may not understand the pain that goes along with a murder in your community, where you have to watch a body lie on the ground for hours until the coroner comes, and while you have to time after time hear police professionals tell you that it was justified, the collateral damage that is done is far greater than you can ever imagine. So while we decided that we were going to sue the police and the city for racial profiling and police brutality after Jeffrey Irons, Roger Owensby, 2 and 24, it was hard. Many black folk told us not to do it. They told us that the police would only get worse and they would only treat us in more difference. Many white folk didn't believe that the police played a role if you black people would just do what they say. Right. If you would not question them, look at them, talk back. Roger Owensby willingly let them search him. So we thought that we were doing something different. And by the way, my business is less than a block away from where Roger was killed. So when I look at that gas station, I have 3 sons and a husband. I used to have a dog. I got rid of the dog. It was too much testosterone in my house. But when I look at that corner, I think about my children, which they're all adults. And as a parent, how many parents are in the house tonight? And as a parent, you shouldn't have to worry about your adult children in the way that African Americans have to worry about our children. It takes years off your life. This is so stressful being black in America. So while we were trying to stop another murder, it happened. And many more have happened on our watch since we've had the collaborative agreement. The collaborative is only as strong as the community, but the conditioning that goes on when you kill someone and you watch a trial happen. Yes, we had officers indicted, but as you all see, an indictment is not a conviction. And what were they indicted for? Roger Owensby was a veteran, and I know that was very hard for April and Paul, and I want to thank them. Please, let's give them another applause for that wonderful video. Roger Owensby was never depicted as a veteran in our newspaper. You all know that. They never showed a video of him in his uniform. They only showed the ones with his hair up. They only showed the ones where he was relaxed. They never showed him in his uniform, and we often wondered why. And that's so you all could see a picture of another thug. You could assume, well, wasn't he a drug dealer? You heard the white sister on the video say, well, aren't they all drug dealers? And one thing, must be a reason. Let me get back to your point, because I can go on all day about my little town up south, gateway to the south. Little town down by the river. The effectiveness is only as strong as what the people make it. We are taxpayers, whether you are black and white. We've seen some very positive results of what we've done, and we've seen some very negative results of what we've done. We can always look back and learn lessons, and some are very stark lessons. The chair of Law and Public Safety that you saw in the video is now our mayor. He touts himself as being the chief negotiator of the collaborative agreement. He doesn't do it in my presence. However, the effectiveness, again, is only as strong as what the people make it. And this is where everyday tax-paying citizens really need to stand up to say, we are the bosses of the bosses. It is up to us, we the people, to determine how fair policing will be done in our town. It is up to each and every one of you. It could be your child. We're seeing it now that some non-African Americans are being killed and beaten at the hands of the police in different parts of the country, but none like you see in the African American community. You all saw that 5-year-old baby being handcuffed. If it didn't make you cry, something's wrong with you, and we don't want you to apply for a police position. That's unacceptable behavior. That should never, ever happen. Never. Slavery is over.
But is it?
Is it?
Everybody's looking at me. I'm sitting here enthralled with Iris because you all saw me digging in my bag. I'm the bag lady. I have all kinds of bags. I got notes. This is the Collaborative Agreement Handbook. And Iris lent this to me when a couple of us went down to Cincinnati so I could take a look at it. And this is the Cleveland consent decree. It's double-sided, not quite as thick. But the reason that I walk around with them, first of all, because I owe Iris back her Collaborative Agreement Handbook that she has graciously lent me for quite some time. But the thing that is remarkable here, you hear her talk about the limitations of the even collaborative agreement that they've had. But what was so remarkable for me and some of my colleagues and activists on the ground and policy folks and folks who really care and are passionate about how do we transform the conditions of the police department, how do we transform the ways in which police brutality happens in our community, how do we transform the ways in which police accountability is thin and police are not held accountable. We looked to Cincinnati because at least we said Cincinnati was able to get the Black United Front at the table as a legal standing party that had power of subpoena and ability to stand before the court and put a halt on things if it wasn't going right. In Cleveland, we just signed our consent decree, and I say we, meaning the city of Cleveland and the U.S. Department of Justice just signed our consent decree. But there was no community standing, legal, intervening party at the table. There were people who were making suggestions. The Collaborative for a Safe, Fair, and Just Cleveland is the group that I work with, and along with a lot of others, new abolitionists and Ohio students, and there were just so many, just grassroots activists who don't even have a name in an organization, Carl Stokes Brigade, just out there working to try to figure out BORDC. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to name them all, so forgive me if folks look at this later and I don't name who they are. But we didn't even have legal standing, we don't have legal standing party at the table. And so to think about if you have the power of the courts behind you as a party, and there's still limitations, there's still the inability to engage in a process that will bring transformative change and cultural and systemic changes in ways that don't result in future deaths. Imagine what we're trying to figure out how to do in Cleveland without having any legal standing before the court. So we just keep raising our voices and raising our voices and raising our voices. The collaborative agreement, like our consent decree, deals with excessive use of force, deals with use of force, deals with lethal use of force, deals with search and seizure, deals with stop and frisk, stop and walk, drive while black, all of those things. I mean, there are different names for it, and there's a history of this kind of policing in black communities from the times of the slave patty rollers and the times of enslavement all the way up to today. In fact, the patty rollers was one of the first iterations of the police force.
That's right.
So there's a long history of race and profiling and race and policing in black communities and in communities that are poor. And we're now trying to figure out ways, both activist ways and ways through the court system, to actually make change. And yet there's still limitations. One thing I just want to say, because
Can you say this right here? 'Cause
Yeah,
you all don't have this.
Right.
Right. Which is a class.
Right. We don't have a class, and this is.
Can you read the
Yeah, I'm gonna
class?
read it for you. This is in the collaborative agreement, Cincinnati. All African Americans. The class shall be defined as all African American or black persons and people perceived as such who reside, work in, and or travel on public thoroughfares in the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, either now or in the future, and who are stopped, detained, or arrested by Cincinnati police officers or their agents, and citizens of any race who have been or will be subjected to a use of force by Cincinnati police officers and their agents. People are losing their lives. People are not being treated with human rights and dignity and respect. And this has been perpetual and pervasive. And it's not going to go away unless all of us see it as part of our responsibility to transform the conditions that people live in. And it's not going to go away unless we begin to have honest conversations about race and honest conversations about words like white supremacy and honest conversations around economic justice and honest conversations around property over people and honest conversations of profit over people. All of those things that establish the social context and the political context and the continuous historical will that merges into the contemporary period that continues to oppress people. And the police department is one manifestation of broader issues that can result in, have resulted in, I'm going to say, unfortunately, will continue to result in, hopefully less so deaths of people.
May I just say something? I just left Cincinnati, and last night we had a police-involved tasing, and the brother died. What the collaborative agreement has allowed us to do is to have very careful, thoughtful, procedural conversations around police-involved shootings and or tasings and or chokings. So we've not had an asphyxiation since Roger Owensby. We've not had that. And so what happened last night in Cincinnati, because I don't want anyone, first off, I don't want you to believe that Cincinnati PD and the African American community are now utopia. That ain't it. We just realized we have power. And not everyone really wants that power because the conditioning, Dr. Rhonda, has been far greater than the past 15 years. And so we are on our third mayor, our third police chief, our second city manager. And when you have all these politics involved in systems, April, it becomes very ugly. So all of these things are what we're trying to give to Cleveland, Baltimore, Ferguson, anywhere, New York, anywhere that is experiencing this level of mistreatment on a particular segment of people.
So I just recently, actually 2 days ago, moved back from Oakland. And if any of you all know the history of Oakland, especially the most recent history of how we throw down in Oakland, after what happened at the convening for Black Life, we met Black Seed and we had a conversation, and we were so empowered by how we were able to liberate that Black boy. And we said, how do we start community response teams in our own community? Who lives on our block? Is there someone that deals with mental health? Is there someone that is dealing with housing? How do we not include the police? That the police are not our first phone call, but the first phone call is someone who lives on our block or someone that can help solve this problem without having to deal with the state. How do we start to police our own communities is the conversations that we have been having in Oakland and in other parts, in other cities across the country, that doesn't need to be the first phone call. If there are resources in our own community, how do we utilize them? How do we reach out to them? The collaborative is great. I believe in the collaborative. I'm proud of all the work that went into the collaborative. But if we're talking about Afrofuturism, if we're talking about a radical reimagination, what does that look like without calling the police? And if we're talking about like loving one another and being in community with one another, how do we utilize the skills and the resources in our community so that we don't have to call the police? What does that look like? Those are the questions that I'm asking myself. And so we're having these conversations of starting to do a block by block, like who lives on this block? Who does this? Who does that? You know, there's already a community medic team in Oakland. So if somebody gets shot, then we have someone that we can call until the police get there. So similar situation, if some type of violence or some type of crime happens, who can we call in our own community to deal with that situation and not have to always rely on the police? Before I moved to Oakland, I thought it was a cliche when people say, you know, power to the people. I didn't believe in that. I thought it was a cliche until I actually participated in actions and participated in a movement where I got a chance to see that all of us in this room, right here, right now, we are the power. We are the ones we have been waiting for. And let me give you an example of what that looks like, is that the city of Oakland tried to illegally sell a piece of property to developers. San Francisco, Oakland is being quickly gentrified. I and a couple of other activists shut down city council. We would not let city council have a meeting because they were illegally selling a piece of property. What happened after 5 city council meetings, after sitting there till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, we were able to force the city of Oakland to take that off the ballot. Now the city has opened up the RFP process to affordable housing. That's what that looks like. And so that also carries over into every other aspect of our community, whether it be policing, whether it be housing, whether it be healthcare. We all have the resources. How do we share that with one another so that we don't have to depend on the state? The state is not going to save you. It's not. It has shown you time and time again that it's not going to save you. We are going to save each other.
You know, I'm jumping. She getting fired up now. So the state may not save you, but the fact of the matter is the state would not exist without our tax money. So at the same time that we need to figure out for real, how we find ourselves, and we can find ourselves in situations where we don't have to depend on the state, and particularly a police state that some of us experience as a terror state in our own communities. We need to also hold it accountable to the people and to how our money is being used, for what it's being used, education versus militarization of police forces, you know, more gunnery, more different kinds of pepper sprays, different kinds of gaseous things that can tear up people's insides by just spraying it, those kinds of things. Like, what do we want our money to be spent on? So I think the thing for me is, how do we do this at multiple levels? Because I want to be in a place where April's talking about, that's the ability to vision and to be able to think about what we want to see down the road. Because if we can't do that, then we're not going to be able to get outside the boxes that we've been put in to do the creative things to make us move the society forward in a progressive way for everybody, and not just those who already have power. Right. At the same time, we've got to figure out ways to mobilize community to be operating on all fronts. The collaborative agreement in Cincinnati, operating on all fronts through the Black United Front in Cincinnati, operating on all fronts. The Community Police Commission, as Greg gets stood up in Cleveland, operating on all fronts, knowing the limitations, but still needing to be at the table, but still knowing that community needs to be involved, and they need to organize, and there need to be campaigns, and there are all kinds of things we need to do. How do we make sure that people are engaged and invested in the processes that are going to transform our communities?
So since I'm the grandma on the panel, and I say that in a loving way, because really I am a grandma, I do belong to Jesse Rowley and my 3 sons, and my oldest son is 30-something. I'm not going to tell y'all, but then you start trying to figure out how old I am. But that's okay, because trying to hold an administration accountable on multiple levels has kept my blood pressure down. And so while we've watched the city of Cincinnati do its gentrification. We've watched them move people out. Let me digress for a second. Before we got the collaborative, I want to tell you how we got it. It wasn't easy.
That story. Yep.
So we had a federal lawsuit that I told you about that we filed in March of 2001. We had people in the street, And we had an economic sanction and boycott against travel and tourism. By our count, and if anybody want to guess who was the first national, international person, do you know, April, who pulled out of Cincinnati? Do you remember who that was?
Was it Bill Cosby?
It was Bill Cosby. So we loved him then.
We don't love him now.
But he heard the cries from the wilderness, and he did not cross the line. We say that we cost the city $220 million. And it was very unfortunate that we had to take those drastic steps because there are consequences to doing that. Black folks were the first people to lose their jobs from hotels and businesses in downtown. Black people were the first ones to lose their jobs from the bus companies. So there were consequences to calling those types of actions. But when you see 15 unarmed black men killed at the hands of the police, the measures must be drastic. And unfortunately, we were dealing with people who were more concerned about power, brick, and mortar than about its citizens. And so we had to take those drastic measures in order to just get this little bitty thing. But we also were trying to be accountable in all of the areas that we talk about each and every day, whether they are housing, education, whatever it was. Right. We were trying to be accountable. But it seems as though because people want to have the creation of a permanent underclass because their forefathers' forefather indoctrinated them into that type of thinking, it's very difficult to have a rational, practical conversation about Black lives. And I tell young folk today, Black lives has mattered to me since I was born. I told you I was born on the front line. This is nothing new. And so you hear the same things over and over again. Yesterday, our Urban League released its report on the state of Black Cincinnati, a 20-year report, and it said the same thing from 20 years ago. The income equality, the gap is wide. The housing gap is wide. Education gap is wide. When are we going to be accountable to the children? When are we going to make a better place for them?
I want to ask a quick question just to make sure so we can get to some of the audience questions and get them engaged. And I ask this specifically to the filmmakers and to people documenting this in terms of how we think about this framing of all this work you're talking about that's went on, that without films like this, we wouldn't even know. A lot of people wouldn't even know about the collaborative agreement, about the Black Front, would not know about the work happening either that happened then and is happening now, that you don't know about these community policing or formations of citizen review boards, police and citizen community boards. So I'm wondering how you think media in particular plays a role for us in thinking through both documenting racial injustices, right, and anti-Black racial terror, and also thinking about the role it plays perhaps in progressively thinking about the kinds of change that you're trying to affect with this. And speaking kind of to even your motivation of making a film like this and naming it Cincinnati Goddamn, referencing such a particular moment, right? Mississippi Goddamn, Nina Simone, who in fact is speaking to the 4 little girls who were bombed in Birmingham, right? Or Bombingham, as it's known at the time. And contextualizing that a little bit for us as media makers. Do you want to jump in?
Well, I think it's interesting that Cincinnati, that these events happened before social media and before everybody had a camera in their pockets and can just snapshot what's going on in the communities. And before then, it was people running around with cameras and handing out leaflets and flyers to send out information. And I think that's a huge difference between, of course, now and then, is that now police have to be accountable for their actions because we have cameras to document their every move. Right. And go ahead.
I think for me, what is so important about this film is so often is the erasure of our history, the invisibility that is put on Black people. Our stories are not told, and it is up to us to tell those stories. And I feel like the name the title of the film is so apt because we are living in a state of emergency. We're living in a state of emergency. As a Black person, there are moments when I am afraid to walk out of my door. My 3-year-old nephew is sitting in the audience with my mother somewhere, and I think to myself, what is his life going to be like? After Sandra Bland, so many of us thought to ourselves, could we be next? Am I next? You know, like I literally asked that question because of the work that I did, because of the work that I do in this film. And also, you know, I remember that the last video that she made. I remember that last video that she made. And I asked myself, like, could that be me? Could that happen? And so for me as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman, it is so important that I document what is happening in our community so that the next generation knows, because so many people don't know about what happened in Cincinnati. They have no idea that this movement was going on. Cincinnati was ground zero. People have no idea that there was a boycott, that there was a collaborative, all of these things. And so now, as a part of this movement that is being led by Black women, Black queer women, it is so important. That is my job, is to tell this story. And this film is just the first iteration. I actually just had a gallery show in Oakland where I documented the Say Her Name action in San Francisco on Market Street, where Black women went topless as a form of protest against the Black women that have been victims of state violence. So this is my job. I tell people I don't know how to do anything else. I can't do anything else.
It's amazing that April went to Oakland because she was too busy filming us and telling us what to do. And so now she's in Oakland.
It wasn't Oakland.
Yeah,
Now I'm going to Chicago.
Right, was in Oakland doing her thing. So we love you anyway.
And so it's just important that, that we tell our own stories. And we're living in the age of Black Twitter, Black Tumblr, where we have these alternative modes of media, and we're able to control what is put out about us. Like, we have some control over the stories, over the narratives, and I think that is so important. And yeah, I'm just happy that I can make a contribution to that.
I wanted to just digress a second because I don't want it to appear that it is no roses inside of the collaborative agreement. It has been some great significant work. As a matter of fact, there's an issue with the chief and they're calling me saying, well, how should we handle this particular issue with the chief? The chief is calling, so if you see me texting, please forgive me. But if there's a state of emergency with the police, then that means there will be a greater state of emergency for Black folk in the city of Cincinnati. And as I said, politics plays a heavy, heavy hand in this. But the greater good of that is that many of community members, and since we were a party, there were 3 parties to our federal lawsuit: the city, the Black United Front because of the class, and the Fraternal Order Police, the police department. And because we had to agree on everything from the federal monitor to the conciliator to everything that came out of the agreement, we now sit in panels of interviewing for our chief, lateral officers, recruitment classes, training policies and procedures. We have very thorough conversations. Now, do we always understand are there any police in the audience? No? You can tell the truth. It's okay. Oh, we got one. Well, hey, welcome. And so while we don't always understand, and I'm going to address what you said, April, we don't always understand what it takes to police properly, we certainly are willing to learn. I do look forward to a world. I only see 3 alternatives. We don't engage police. We allow them to do what they do. That's one alternative. And that's what most people do. They believe that they know what they're doing. 2, we engage them because we are taxpayers. And it is our duty to make sure that our police are policing in a proper manner. Or 3, we can patrol and protect our own communities. And in some parts of this little small country of ours, some people are doing that. So I look very forward to that, because the imbalance of beginning of trusting in a system that has built itself to have a segment of people not trust them and believe them. When you can see a 5-year-old child run from a police officer, there is something so terribly wrong with that. But this agreement has allowed us to do far greater things, and I believe even our police, some of them anyway, like the fact of the overhaul. At first they didn't. They came kicking and screaming, even though we invited them to the table. We wanted to do something very different than what Pittsburgh had done. We wanted to make sure that the very critical C, which is community, was engaged and involved in the entire process. I think you got a question over there.
Yes, I think we're going to get some audience questions in a second. I think they're being written and stuff. I have one quick follow-up, actually, April, to something you said that spoke directly, and it speaks to one of our Twitter questions, I believe, that speaks to, you mentioned Sandra Bland, and you mentioned this, when you made this film, right, we were talking about these 15 unarmed Black men who were killed in Cincinnati, and kind of thinking about this, especially within the 2010s, as we're seeing recently, a growing number of Black women having, and at least a record now that we're having of encounters, with police encounters. In particular, in July, 6 Black women were found dead in police custody. Sandra Bland was only the name that really became galvanized around and telling those stories. And wondering how you see your role, even as a filmmaker, media maker, scholars, and activists, of how we even tell the narrative of what racial terror looks like, right? What anti-Blackness looks like in this, right? And Cincinnati is this very particular story, and yet there are these shared similarities between Ferguson, Baltimore, Oakland, name a city. At this point, Cleveland, right? Cleveland, you have both Tamir Rice and Tanisha Anderson.
Right, yeah.
So how do we think through this thing, through these lenses that open up the possibility of really the broadness and expansiveness of what that looks like, and then even further to include 17 really underreported and understudied murders of trans women of color, right? To think about this broadly in terms of what's being told, what narratives we're actually getting about anti-Black racial terror.
I'm going to toss this question to Dr. Rhonda because I'm sitting on the stage, you all, with 3 of my most favorite, brilliant Black women who I look to for guidance and knowledge. And so, Dr. Rhonda, I'm going to kick this question down to you because I want to hear what you have to say.
You all, you have to have a little bit, these are hard conversations. I know you all know that. You got to have a little levity, so sometimes when it seems like it might not be appropriate to have a little levity like the, you got to do it again. You got to do it because it'll tear you up on the inside. I think we have to consistently lift the names up of women and recognizing that they are also meeting their deaths at the hands of police, or by extension of other circumstances in society by which they're often ignored. So, you know, I said Cleveland Heights, you know, there was a young woman who was found dead in her jail cell, and we're still trying to figure out how it is and why it is she ended up dead after being arrested. Domestic violence victim, and arrested for apparently perpetuating a violence or threat of violence against the person who was the person who committed domestic violence against her, but ended up dead, and we still don't know why. There's Tanisha Anderson, whose name often gets lost behind Tamir Rice. And they're all important. And what often happens is that women disappear, and gender disappear, and there's Cece, and transgender persons disappear. And so I think that's part of the power dynamic, that's part of the patriarchy of society, that's part of the ways in which it dovetails with questions around race and white supremacy and privilege. And I think that it's incumbent upon us as Black women, as Black men, as white women, as white men, as however you want to identify yourself in terms of gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, it crosses the gamut, that all of these lives are important to see the ways in which people are disappeared in society, and how all of that is violence. Right, and so one of the things, can I just say that one of the things that we're talking about now, one of the reasons we're talking about the kind of violence we're talking about now is because we're talking about death. But there are people who are living still who are dealing with violence, right? And who are being violated, and whose human dignity and respect is being violated. And it could be actual physical, but it could be also economic and social and political. It could be emotional and psychological. And so these are all various forms of violence. In fact, Coretta Scott King said, right at the Poor People's March, after her husband was killed, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? And she was marching with poor women, with the National Welfare Rights Organizations and others who people demonize and create violence around and call them out their name and caricature them and stereotype them, and therefore they're not worthy of being discussed. And this is also one of the reasons why women get disappeared behind the scenes. They're not acknowledged. She said that denying someone food is violence, denying someone medical care is violence, denying someone hospital care is violence, denying someone education is violence. All of these things are forms of violence. The one we're talking about is the one that's lethal, but there's a continuum of violence. And I think African American women and women in general are often disappeared behind these things called domestic violence. Well, isn't that just like in the home? Isn't that like a private thing? You know, women are one of the fastest growing populations in the criminal justice system, partly connected to questions of domestic violence. Right? And so I think just people don't understand not only the roots, but the contemporary manifestations of the way in which women also suffer. At the same time, I think it's critically important, and that it would be good to get some audience folks in here. At the same time, it's critically important to understand that as we continue to say her name and lift up the women who aren't talked about and try to understand the gender dynamics and gender violence around that, that we cannot forget to continuously lift up men's names as well. And why do I say that? I just gotta say this. Why do I say that? I was in a situation where we were listing all the lives that mattered, all the various lives that mattered. And we named all the various lives, but men's lives were left out of the calling. Because sometimes there's a sense that we say men's lives so much, black men's lives so much, that we don't need to call out their name because everybody else's name is missing. And I say that while we call out everybody else's name that's missing, that is marginalized, we also have to call out their names because they are dying in tremendous numbers as well. And so we have to look at the relation between race and gender and class and physical violence and lethal violence and emotional violence and psychological violence, educational violence, the collateral consequences of all of those things when you find yourself incarcerated and coming out and trying to be a returning citizen and trying to escape the shame and put your life back together, and then you can't get federal loans to go to school, and you can't get public housing to get you back on your feet, and you can't access the various things because you found yourself in the criminal justice system, but now you're out and you're trying to do right by yourself as a woman or a man.
What did Deanna call that? She said that was serving your time once you get out of jail. So you gonna go to questions?
Yeah, I'm going to start going questions from
Yeah,
the
we're
audience,
talkers,
and we can
want
do
y'all
this
to
all
talk.
night. I have a couple still up here, but I see we have one in the audience.
Do you want my mic, sister girl? Can everybody hear her?
Hello. I have a question around how might we address issues in Black impoverished communities from a public health lens. So I'm thinking about a lot of research around African Americans in violent communities suffering from PTSD, not because they went to a war across the seas, but they're going on with a war within their communities, not only because of violence that's happening there, but also being in a police state. And maybe that being a part of the sensitivity training of police when they see them as a reason for running, as a reason for fighting back because of this potential mental health issues? Or I'm just thinking about how might we look at it from a public health standpoint. Is anybody, has that come up, and how might we address that?
Health Commissioner has done a 132-page document, Deanna, on violence being a public health issue. And it talks about all the environmental designs that contribute to that. And so you're absolutely correct. What we try to do in Cincinnati, although our police officers go through the state training, they go through 5 times more training. But it's becoming very more difficult because people want to feel safe. And so you have this balance of making people feel safe and the appropriate treatment of everyone, and everyone being treated fairly by peace officers. So it's a very difficult balance for those who come outside of your community into your community that don't and never understood what it takes to patrol. As the brother Dwight said in the video, police patrol in the Black community, but they protect and serve in the white community. Anybody else?
I mean, I'm going to answer that question. So, I'm sorry. Okay. So, I was raised in Glendale, Ohio, which is a suburb. It's a village, quaint. Everyone knows everyone. You know, last time I got a ticket in Glendale, the police actually apologized to me. Then I moved to Oakland. And it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I have a paper due, and I'm up working. And the police are searching for someone. They shut off the street lights, and there are helicopters flying over my house for several hours nonstop. I'm literally laying on the floor crying. The next morning, my roommate said, "Oh, yeah, we're used to that. Like, that happens all the time." But for me, I had never experienced that. So now every time I hear a helicopter, I think that the police are coming. And it scares me. And I've seen it multiple times. And so when you talk about PTSD as a public health, this is what happens in our community all the time. I see it. Just 2 weeks ago, Oakland police shot and killed someone around the corner from my house. And the helicopters were out for several hours. And it triggered me. And all I kept thinking about is, am I going to be able to go to sleep tonight? Am I going to be able to go to sleep tonight? You know, my roommate and I are having this conversation like, oh, fuck. Are the police going to be out all night? Are we going to have the same experience? What's this going to be like? And so when you talk about like PTSD and public health, my mind immediately goes to, are there free counseling services? Can I get some somatic body work? You know, there are different services that need to be offered to these communities after these incidences happen. Or like, I'm waking up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm like, why do I hear police chatter? And I look out my back window and the police, 5 of them, have their weapons drawn and they're searching for someone. Now, whatever this person did it require the police to show up in that kind of force? Could the police have knocked on my door and maybe let us know what they were doing? No, they don't. Don't come out of your house. We have the streets surrounded. So even though I don't live in Oakland anymore and I'm moving to Chicago, I don't know what to expect in Chicago because we know how Chicago police get down. Let's be for real. But that's trauma that I am carrying with me. So when we talk about it being a public health issue, what type of services is the police department going to offer for my community? How are they going to come into my community and not respond with military-style force? The police, I don't see police, I never see police walking around my neighborhood of Oakland, never, unless they are searching for someone. So let's talk about that as a public health issue. Like, for real. And I grew up in the suburb. Like, this scared the shit out of me. And most people in Oakland are like, oh, yeah, it's just everyday occurrence. That's not how we should. Yeah, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'm
I'm
gonna take,
sorry. See, nobody told you that when you went on your tangent. But that's okay. It's
so I'm
fine.
going to take one question. This is from the audience here, and then we'll come here out to the audience right after that. This specifically was asked about as a white ally, and often in the movement we actually talk about accomplices or comrades, right? Because ally means you can sometimes leave when you choose to or want to, but an accomplice in addressing certain things. But what can you do to stop police brutality, and more broadly, what are some of these steps that you see taking, particularly in addressing some of the concerns you just mentioned, and it's the question that was just asked around these things, and seeing some of that work around community healers, community work that's being done, but addressing that to the state as well?
I think that one thing that we need to do is have positive conversations with each other as white people. We can talk to each other about what's going on, and when we see something in the news, we get together and have a conversation about it. And if you're in a room and you see something or hear something racist that goes on, I think it's imperative that you say something and speak up, and because staying silent is really just as bad as supporting the oppression. So I think it's important for all of us as white allies to come together, have conversations. You might be the most unpopular person in the room, after being the person who's going to be like, you shouldn't say things like that or whatever. But I think it's important to speak up and be active.
Let me add something to that, too. As a taxpayer, it is your duty that when you go and you cast your vote, to not make it just on a popularity type of vote, that you hold people accountable for what they do know. Mm-hmm. And it's not what they don't know, and not the one-line zingers that you agree with. You need to drill people down to what their policies will be like. What is it that they want to do? What will be their legacy when they leave that office? And that is a family conversation. That is a family conversation. One of the conversations we have in the city of Cincinnati is about our tax dollar, because that gives everybody the ability to wake up. And so when you see less lawsuits being filed against your police municipality, that makes citizens feel better, because that's less of their tax dollars going out to pay families for police misbehavior, right? When you see community engagement on the rise and you can have conversations effective, and sometimes they're hard conversations. As adults, we should have those conversations. I think children have the most hard conversations ever, because they speak the truth. They only become chaotic because we give them the chaos. Once we grow up, we forget what it is to dream and think about how we want the world to change from when we were younger. So if you are a taxpaying citizen and you participate in the bureaucracy of voting and you like to go and vote for people, drill them down around what policing looks like. What are you going to do for the least of these? How are you going to create an avenue of a workforce for those people who can't work, for the returning citizens population? And stay away from the folks who talk about just rounding up in sweeps and arresting everybody. That only costs taxpayers even more.
I want to take these two questions right here. We'll take them back to back and have the panel respond to them, as we're winding down on time. So thank you.
What happened?
I will speak up.
There you go.
Right.
The problem is in part, aside from institutional and individual racism, structural racism, is unaccountable power and elite power. I am told that one of the instruments against unaccountable power is the appointment of independent prosecutors. We have a problem not just of bad actors on the police department, we have bad police departments, we have bad prosecutors, bad counsels. And the independent prosecutor, I am told, is something that communities can do. What experience do you have with that? How do we go about doing that? And are there other things that a community can do to stem this tide?
Okay, thank you. And we'll get this question, and then we'll answer that. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, sir.
Yes. So I guess going back to the question earlier about PTSD and public health, and even hearing some of the things that you guys have been talking about previously. So at the Movement for Black Lives convening, one of the workshops being presented by BYP 100 was talking about what it means to organize from a Black, queer, feminist lens, and one of the values or ethics that was brought to the table as falling under the umbrella of that lens is making space for conversations about trauma and conversations about how we can't relegate that to this footnote in our organizing or creating change, but how that needs to be at the forefront. And so I guess I wonder, in the context of creating policies that reflect this intersectional way of creating change or transformation in our communities, how can we begin to make space for that, not just in, I see this happening more in like grassroots spaces where, people have a working vocabulary around PTSD and around queer and feminist issues, but in, I guess, spaces, how can we begin to push that conversation into other spaces? How can we begin to have an intersectional analysis around policy making? How can this begin to be reflect? Does that make sense? Does this question make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And so in Cincinnati, one of the things that, and I don't know if you're just talking about policing, if you're talking about housing, education, jobs, because for Black, transgender, and queer, it's different. It's different. It's not the same as it would be for white transgenders or white queers. And so there is still the stigma and there's still the separation because you're Black first. And then everything else follows behind that. So if we're talking about policing, and if that's where you were going, I can only tell you what we're doing in Cincinnati, which has got some national recognition. Our current police chief, which by the way, I kind of like him a little bit because he understands the work that we did 14 years ago, and he likes working with children, and particularly those who have suffered from systematic oppression. And so what he has put in place, I think, has far exceeded any other police municipality. There is a whole team designed just for the transgender, queers, intersexual population of people, whether you're Black and or white. I think the other part of your question should be community, because in the Black community we still have issues about that. And so where can we have a very strong, honest conversation about the issues, the trauma, because it's strong, the division is strong, and where we need to come together and see common ground as opposed to not so common of a ground. So in Cincinnati, the police department has a whole division, and they work far better with that community than they do with the Black community, and we fought harder, and I'm mad about that, but it's okay. Anybody else?
On the independent prosecutor, I'll see if I don't want that to get lost. Yeah. So we have to demand independent prosecutors. That's what we have to do as citizens, as residents, as community persons, as activists, as academics, as retired persons, whoever we are. When there is a case, we have to demand that there be prosecutors that are outside of the network process, the network of relationships that exist in the community that could potentially and often taints or builds on those relationships to exonerate people because of those relationships. I live in Cleveland, and right now we have the Tamir Rice case. And there is a group that has been called and dubbed the Cleveland Eight. And I'm one of those persons. And we filed citizen affidavits. And we asked for the arrest of Timothy Loman and Garnback in the murder and killing of Tamir Rice. We had a municipal court judge that ruled probable cause. But unfortunately, the municipal court judge did not issue under the rules that we used, did not issue the arrest warrant so the officers could be arrested and charged. He said it had to be done by the county prosecutor. The county prosecutor is still investigating. This is 10 months later, after it's already been sent out to the sheriff's department to be investigated, and we have a probable cause ruling, but we still have no arrest, no charge. We need independent prosecutors. Prosecutors are working across the country. Prosecutors are working every day with police officers, with police forces. There are different kinds of relationships that they have with those persons in trying to make their cases. Some of them are former police officers. Does this mean there's no county prosecutor or no prosecutor across the country that could not make an independent decision that could actually uphold the rights and the dignity of those who are the victims in the case that are killed by police officers? No. Does it mean that the likelihood of it happening, or let me back that up, it says, if we look at the history of it, can we find the likelihood of that happening? More than not, no. So we need independent prosecutors, and we have to do this through various Department of Justice, the city that you live in, the state apparatus, the vote, the streets, boots on the ground, campaigns, all of the things. We have to call it all to bear to say we need independent prosecutors in these cases. I would encourage you all to look up the Cleveland 8 online. We released a video, we released an open letter, we talk about the grand jury process, we talk about prosecutors and the relationships that they have. All of these things are a concern to us. The other thing I want to say in just terms of tying it in here, because I know we're running out of time, so I'm talking even quicker than I would normally talk, is that one of the key things is to understand that there are many of us who are on the ground, wherever we are, wherever that ground is for you, who are trying to argue for community, problem-oriented policing. If we're gonna have a policing apparatus, and we're in right now, so we have to figure out how we deal with right now while we also vision, which is to April's point, right? How do we vision something totally different? But we want community problem-oriented policing, which ties to public health, which ties to questions of trauma, which ties to questions of economics, which ties to questions of social inequality, right? So why are people homeless and squatting? Do you just go into an apartment building where somebody is squatting, because they have nowhere to live because they're homeless, and you just arrest them all? Or do you figure out what's going on with that? That's community problem-oriented policing. Right? That's called problem solving. And so there's a way in which you look at the social determinants, you look at the upstream, you try to deal with some of those issues, you try to deal with people's concerns and questions on the ground now in terms of the problems that they're dealing with, and you don't automatically use the tool of policing to just sweep people in to a system without trying to deal with what else is going on. Now, there are moments where, some tragic, nasty stuff is happening. But one of the things that I found encouraging in terms of meeting Iris's chief was that one of the first things he had them do, and Iris, correct me on this, one of the first things he had his new cadets do was not to just pick up their gun and just go out and start figuring out how to police communities. He had them do service for a week. This is the hierarchy we want you to operate in. Actually, let's get rid of the word hierarchy, because I don't like the word hierarchy. This is the situation, the social situation we want you to operate in. We want you to think about protecting and serving the community, and then the tool, at the end of the day, the last tool, when it's called for the most egregious situations, is when you resort to policing. I'm not talking about use of force, excessive force, or lethal force. I'm talking about policing as the modus operandi. So all of that, I think, is connected. But we have to turn to independent prosecutors.
We have to kind of end it out. And I wanted to just ask this last question that I think will speak to a couple of things, specifically coming back to Cincinnati and some of the work that you've done with the recent murder of Sam Dubose, right? And a lot of questions coming in around how you think the collaborative agreement might have gotten a kind of quicker response from the city in relationship to that to what's again the charges being filed. In so many of these cases, we haven't even seen indictments. There have been non-indictments, not even charges in these cases. But with Samuel DuBose, you saw something different, but still this fear that I think that very much so exists.
Don't get caught up in the hype.
Right,
though.
within the community, that this still is an instance, even with the video, with the transcript, with the outrage, with the strong statements publicly made, that this too could be another Roger Owensby or another Timothy Thomas. And I was wondering if we could kind of end there thinking specifically about Cincinnati and Samuel DuBose.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds, Iris, and that's it. So, because I'm going to wrap it up. Because you long-winded. So 30 seconds. Go.
Don't hate me because I know. So one of it's so important because if you brush over a life, Samuel DuBose was a friend, and the reason that I stumble is because he was the fourth black man killed at the hands of UCPD. So it's the University of Cincinnati PD. My cousin, my father's sister that was right next to him, was the third black man killed at the hands of UCPD. Everett Howard, 18-year-old, very educated, articulate, bright young man on his way to a bright future, was the second. And Lorenzo Collins, which you saw in this film, UC played a part in murdering him as well. So it's four. So I cannot talk about it quickly because I compressed my feelings around my cousin so that my family could deal with it legally in court. And so again, you think that you are reforming a system, and we thought we reformed the university around its taser use. They refuse to use tasers now because they don't want to do community engagement and have proper policies, procedures, and protocol, as they did not have with their body cameras. So the university, we didn't sue the university, we sued the Cincinnati PD. So the university was not part of our collaborative agreement. However, what I did not know and what I did find out, April and Paul, is that the city and the university had a separate MOU outside of the mutual aid agreement, Officer Mann, which every municipality has with all other municipalities, am I correct, for assistance under their mutual aid agreement. But the city and the university had a separate MOU which gave the authority of the officers to do minor traffic stops. Too much power because we don't know what their training, their culture sensitivity, any of that stuff did not mirror what we expect from our officers in the city of Cincinnati. So it is very tragic. It is very jarring to know that they have the ability to police across the city. And then I'll just leave it there because it is in court. We are pressuring the university. I don't have much faith in the university's leadership at this time. There has not been any settlement with the family in the civil suit. I'm very worried about the strong language that our prosecutor talked about because now the Officer Tenzing and his attorney has filed for change of venue. So don't get caught up in the hype.
I just want to say thank you to the Wexner Center for the Arts for film and video, Jennifer Lang, Mike Olenek, Paul Hill, Crystal, Stay Philippi.
And we want to thank Sherry and Amanda and the entire education department, everyone for being here tonight. This is why we made this film, to have events like this. It means so much. We had like 933 people or so here tonight. It's really means so much to us.
Thank you to
thank you
all of the panelists. I appreciate you. Get home safely. Have a good night. And we will be around for questions if you guys want to come up and ask us some questions. Thank you.